related to human amongst children and youth in our system, including those missing from care. And this is a preview of some of those laws. I'm not going to dig into these one by one because it's right before lunch and, but here are some of them for your reference. And I think these slides are available afterwards if anyone wants to do some further research into that. So that Juvenile Victims of Trafficking Act, or the JVTA, is a big one, and that is tied into, on the next slide, talking about the Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act of 2022. So this has to do with some of our reporting requirements. On the next slide, please. Thanks. There we go. So this is pulled from this public law. There was an update that we received just about a year ago, and we're updating our missing from care policy to be more aligned with this. But it's basically that the state agency has to maintain regular communication with both law enforcement and NCMEC. And what's remarkable about that is that NCMEC is not a government agency. They're not law enforcement and they're not government, but this is the position that they hold of just being that direct resource and also reporting mechanism. They have a lot of things available to them that we'll get into a little bit later. But then, previously we weren't allowed to give NCMEC photographs, and that was sort of a point of consternation for us on an ongoing basis, is that we didn't have the authority to release a photo. And with the passage of this PL 117-348, suddenly we could give them a photo and be a little more open about some of the circumstances regarding that young person. That's not to supersede the rights of their legal guardian if they have a parent involved in the dependency process, but it allows us to at least get that communication going. But these are some of the things that we talk about, is that endangerment information. And linking us to this next part here about the endangerment that, is a primary focus for the program and concern for us. There's a lot of overlap with missing from care and commercial sexual exploitation of children. That's why both of those programs sit with me. There is evidence that certain populations are disproportionately at risk, which is including individuals who have been exposed to other forms of violence, child abuse and neglect, maltreatment, interpersonal violence, sexual assault, gang violence are some examples of that, and individuals who are disconnected from stable support networks. So that's where we get into youth who have left their home for many different reasons. And there's lots of push-pull involved with why young people go on the run. And I think Blair's going to go into that a little bit more, but it's not always just like it's not always like a young person's not getting their way, so they're leaving. There's a lot more going on with them in almost all cases. So children and youth in foster care are considered at greater risk, as it says here. And this is a public document that everyone can have access to. And then on the next slide, please. So this is some of the intersection. We talk a lot about intersectionality in this work as it relates to youth who are involved in systems such as child welfare and juvenile justice are at increased risk of being exploited. We also know that trafficking disproportionately impacts BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ communities at higher rates. There's a report called Surviving the Streets of New York that found that transgender youth in particular were 8 times more likely to experience trafficking. So we often also hear people reference vulnerabilities, and this talks about vulnerabilities of our young people. But in this context, we try to sort of reframe as well to make sure that none of that blame is falling on the young person for exploitation or trafficking. That is solely with the perpetrator, solely with the buyer that targets the young person. And youth who are disenfranchised from their families or have left wherever they're staying as their home, albeit temporary if it's a foster home situation, they are targeted by traffickers because they are searching for places to stay, someone to take care of them, etc. So it's important to sort of keep that in your mind when you're working with young people. I know our locators do, that our young people are targeted.
Yeah, that kind of ties into this next slide, which is it's just an overview of the relevant Washington state law that pertains to what I do on a daily basis in the Missing from Care program. And I'm not going to read off all the numbers to these. WACS is the abbreviation, but it stands for Washington Administrative Code, and the RCW stands for Revised Code of Washington. That they're essentially just collections of session law that kind of ties into it. But the more important one at the more important law at the top here is just the definition of what a missing child is. And I'm sure you're all thinking, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? A missing child is a child that we don't know where they are. But as it pertains to what we do in DCYF, a missing child means any child less than 18 years of age in licensed care or under the care, custody, and authority of DCYF, and the child's whereabouts are unknown. The child has either left care without permission of the child's caregiver or DCYF or both. And this does not include children in a dependency guardianship. But I think it's important to bring this up because when a child is missing for us, we essentially a child is out of care, right? So a child is either not in their foster home, their group home, their relative placement, wherever they are placed. If they run away and don't come back by the end of the night, they're a missing child. Sometimes we butt heads with law enforcement because law enforcement views a missing child or a runaway child. They have a difference between a runaway and a missing child. So, there are situations where, you may hear about a child showing up at a relative's house, but then leaving the same day. We may communicate that to law enforcement, and law enforcement may say, oh, well, the child was found. And we have to argue back and say, well, no, they were found, but they left, and we don't know where they are now. So that's how we define a missing child. It's whenever they are out of placement or staying in an unapproved location. If they run away and it's overnight, they are missing to us. And these next laws down, the next one says it outlines the reporting responsibilities when a child is missing from care, except for overnight shelters. And the law there kind of ties in directly to our missing from care policy, which we'll go over in the next, I believe it's 2 slides from now. And then the RCW below that is just the duties of Department of Child Welfare Services and the Children's Services Advisory Committee. Just again gives an overview of what our exact duties are in these sorts of situations. And the last one just pertains to interstate compact for juveniles, and that pertains to children that are in the care and custody of DCYF, either moving states, or there are situations when missing children get found in other states too. And the interstate compact is essentially an agreement between the state of Washington and all the other states in the United States. And that program, or the interstate compact, we work together with other states in order to either bring a child back that is in the care or custody of DCYF, or making alternate arrangements with relatives in other states. That's where that kind of ties into that.
Yeah, that's just a good overview of, we have a lot of things to pay attention to all at the same time. And so you can reference these things as well if you want to look into more details about these things. But now just to sort of get into the origin of when we started doing the Missing from Care program in DCYF, which is back when it was under DSHS and we were Children's Administration. There was something called the Brahm Settlement, and that's on the next slide here. So that originated in 1998, and was settled by the department in 2002. Um, so and here's a couple clips from news articles related to Brom, but some good things came out of, having this huge settlement that the department needed to be involved in. When I was hired into children's administration at the time, I had stuff about Brom all through my job description. So Brom established some good practice for the department in terms of child health and education tracking and missing from care. So missing from care was the last item on Brom that was actually the last item was related to first time runs and how we were going to limit the number of first time runs that happened. And that, as you can imagine, a lot of times the adult is the last person to know that a young person is thinking about leaving. It was settled in 2022. Yeah. So it actually settled as COVID was sort of the thing that pushed us over the top in being able to do that, because in the period when things were shut down and young people did not have as many places to congregate, everyone was just sort of staying home because they didn't know what was happening with the virus. And so our number of first time runs went down and we were able to settle. So, but we want to continue the practices that we learned in Brom. And in the time that this has happened, as we sort of showed by some of that federal legislation, other states are catching up to where we already are in having actual people like Blair who go out and try to find young people. They're not just searching online, they're not just using the phone, they're doing those things, but they're actually just going out, learning about a young person, where they might be, and knowing where young people congregate and going and checking that out. So in some of the work that I do, I get to be connected with other leaders in child welfare or people who hold the same work that I hold for other states. And people are curious about Washington because they hear good things about Washington and the things that we're doing, a lot from that NCMEC organization. And so that's a nice thing, is that we did get to be a little ahead of the curve. Like, we're not trying to establish a program like this. We're already doing it. It runs really smoothly, actually. So yeah, I'm pretty proud of the work of that team, although I take no credit. I just get to be a part of it in my position. So, and then here's a little bit about the DCYF policy, with a big caveat about this policy that it's in the process of being updated right now. That plan improvement that I talked about earlier, contacting NCMEC, we can share a photo, that caused us to be able to open up this policy and make those needed changes to that. So it's making the rounds through DCYF. We met about it as a group. The locators had a lot of voice in the things that were going to be updated into that policy that aligned, better with their practice. But this is still the policy that we have, and it's available online. The easiest way to find any of our policies is to Google it, whether you're inside DCYF or out. It's Google it, and it'll give you the most recent version of that thing that is posted online. So we're hopeful for the new policy to be issued sometime in the next few months. But for now, this policy involves a lot of internal processes, search efforts starting within 24 hours, connecting with the team inside DCYF, holding shared planning meetings, which is just gathering and everyone sort of figuring out who's doing what role and what are some of the strategies going to be for bringing the young person back into care, making sure that young person has legal representation. Oftentimes they already do because they're a dependent, so they have an attorney as part of that process. But sometimes, they might not, if they haven't been in contact with that young person for a while, or if that young person might be in shelter care status and not quite yet dependent. So there's some gray areas around our policy. Right now, we're just fixed on when that young person is dependent, but we're moving towards care and custody, which could be involuntary cases or while the child is still in shelter care status, which that's what we want to do. We want to start the process of trying to find them as soon as possible, not waiting for some legal threshold to happen. And then they're however many days ahead of a locator, and it's that much harder to kind of figure out where they might be. And now Blair's going to talk a little bit about the system that we have in place within the locator team.
Yes. So as you can tell, and what has been described about me is that my primary function is to find missing children that are involved in the DCYF systems. What you're seeing in front of you is a list of everyone in the state that does what I do. Um, so I mean, it is pretty small on the screen. I don't know if you guys can see it, but there are 6 total regions in the state. We showed a map earlier, but essentially there's different sections throughout the state that are kind of sectored off. So again, my sector is Region 4, which is King County. So my coworker Danielle and I are the 2 locators in our area. So we're primarily going out and looking for kids in King County, but we also sometimes venture out into other counties too, depending on how close it is. But showing this list here, I just really wanted to highlight how we have people that do what I do in every region, and we all work together. Just because we have a kid from downtown Seattle that runs away, and we kind of get some suspicions that they may be in Spokane or Vancouver. Um, what I do right away is I call up the locator in the area and say, "Hey, this is what's going on," or I'll call or email them depending on what's going on. But um, we all work together to find these kids because we understand that these kids are at risk, and a lot of the youth that we're looking for are young teenagers that are in some pretty sticky situations overall. Um, so we all work together, and what's nice is that we don't have to go through a chain of command to get help. The kids that we're working with are more often than not state dependent youth that we have care and custody of. So the exchange of information is very easy, and we often can get on meetings together to brainstorm ideas on how to recover children. There is a link right there on the middle of the screen where you can find the policy and this exact list of locators. Um, our contact information, our numbers are there. And yeah, another thing is we do just meet on a monthly basis as locators ourselves, and Cameron runs the meetings, and it's a great opportunity for us to kind of discuss and brainstorm, talk about things that are going on specific to our region, see how things are different in other regions. Um, it's just a good way for us all to exchange information and also just keep up to date on the kids that are missing out of our regions.
Yeah, and the beautiful thing is they shout each other out. Like they always give thanks to each other for the way that they help each other out. And I really enjoy getting to facilitate that gathering. And as to that list, I do my best to keep it updated, but there's often changes that happen within roles, within regions. And so anyway, so let's just talk a little bit about some of the considerations when it comes to jurisdiction, in particular with youth. So the Missing from Care program does not engage in these same search efforts for tribal dependent youth with the way that our policy is currently written and some of the jurisdictional considerations about that. So that's not to say that we don't get reach out sometimes. I think all of us are connected to different branches of law enforcement in different ways, or we might get a reach out from be it FBI, be it Homeland Security, local law enforcement at the county or city level may reach out and ask for assistance or ask for what we know about a young person. If we don't have a case open, we are very limited in what we can communicate to the point of we can't really say anything at all. But when we have a case open at the same time as law enforcement, like law enforcement is looking for a young person related to one of their cases, and we have that case open too, we will be engaged in those efforts. And often that locator will be the most direct contact with law enforcement, exchanging information about where the young person might be, who the family members are, who might be involved, etc. But there have been times where, like Washington State Patrol has known about a missing tribal youth who they have on their list of missing people. And our locator has been like, I know who that youth is, and I've seen them downtown, but our locator has no ability to engage that young person with the sort of the boundaries and the rules around jurisdiction. So often with reporting requirements, it can be confusing for workers at times for, when am I engaging this? When am I engaging that? In particular around ICW policy. There have been incidents of, barriers to response, of not knowing who has jurisdiction over a specific young person, if law enforcement is involved, for example. So we do our best to communicate as a team and, be open with law enforcement about our search efforts and where our boundaries are and who would be a best point of contact for them. Really grateful for the work of OTR. I'm not just sucking up here. I really am grateful because I have the opportunity for really good consulting about some of these things with the connections that I have in OTR. So saying that, not buttering you up, but it's true. And then now let's talk a little bit about NCMEC, who's out there, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. This is a QR code that works. So if you hold your phone up to that, you can download that website. This is what I am in connection with NCMEC. They have a National Child Welfare Program Manager, and then they have the country broken down into regional maps. And so there's a regional case manager who covers pretty much the Western United States. And that person is frequently in contact with us around their search efforts or wanting to get information about what we know. They do have access to all the bells and whistles, as I talked about earlier, like facial recognition technology. They have access to NCIC, which is amazing that so a police report is really important to have NCMEC engaged. Everyone kind of needs that police report number going forward. But once that's in there, I mean, NCMEC can pull that information and start working on that themselves. So they can be reached through these websites here. And then they do have a tribal fellow who I've met with, and she's based out of Oklahoma. She's a member of the Choctaw tribe, and she can be contacted at that email address there for the tribal fellow directly if there are questions related to missing tribal youth. But I think they really try to be no wrong number, to tell you the truth. Is just like, if you reach out to them, they're going to do their best to help you navigate through the system. And they have toolkits. They have stuff on their website for like educating children about the dangers of being online and things of that nature. So I think, yeah, check them out. And I'm not a paid sponsor of NCMEC, by the way, though I was just sort of sounding like one.
Alrighty, I guess this is my piece. I'm going to be completely upfront with you. When Cameron asked me to do this presentation with her, and she told me that she wanted me to kind of just tell you guys about what a normal day for me is like, I didn't really know where to begin because honestly, every day is just completely different, and everything that I have on my calendar in a day normally gets switched up 5 or 6 times. But I'm going to do my best to kind of just summarize what a typical day for me is like. And I'm just going to kind of start with just the notification process. So how I am notified about a kiddo being on the run or missing. And the way that typically happens is I'm sure most of you, especially those that work with DCYF, know that if a youth is involved with DCYF, they have an assigned social worker that's working with them and the family. And that's the typical way that I get notified about youth going missing is I'll get a direct email from a social worker letting me know, either from their communication with the foster parent, caregiver, group home, relative. They'll shoot me an email and just let me know that that's what's going on. And from there, I'll typically either one, get on the phone with them, or two, request, and this is more so for children that I'm unfamiliar with. I unfortunately, I shouldn't say it like that. I have a lot of youth that have a routine cycle of going on the run. Not like every month or so, but there are some youth that do have persistent running behaviors. But yeah, so I'll normally get notified with by the social worker, and from there, I staff either with the direct social worker or the supervisor assigned to the case. And from there, I'm going to begin to reach out to either the caregiver of the child or the program director of a group home, wherever the child is placed. I'm going to be calling them myself to get the most up to speed information on what's going on with this child, and try to figure out what were usually there's some sort of some things going on, either in the home or at school or in a social circle with a child. Usually there's something going on that leads to a run, but sometimes there's not. And, obviously sometimes it's substance use related or mental health related. So when I'm getting notified, I'm trying to figure out as much as I can about a child, so that I can figure out how I can locate them, or at least make efforts to, and know I'm not, looking in the wrong place completely. So I do that, and then, as Cameron mentioned in the policy, one of the first things that should happen when a child is missing is someone needs to be calling law enforcement, and 90% of the time that is done by the caregiver of the child. So be it the foster parent, again, group home staff, relative, and this is always discussed with them too when we place a child somewhere. Um, it is our duty to have that conversation with the caregiver, letting them know that it's we have to do this whenever a child runs away. You need to be calling law enforcement to report them as missing. And from there, what we do is we get your local law enforcement agency or the Washington State Patrol or whoever you're calling to make this report. They will give you, and it's called a run report number, or it could be something like an incident number. It's a set of numbers. Um, it's my responsibility and the assigned social worker to get that number, because as Cameron mentioned, NCMEC is a resource to us, and that actually ties into our policy too, that we have to be reporting the child to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children if they are missing as well. So go law enforcement and then NCMEC. And those are just kind of the immediate things that we do. But normally when I'm notified about a case, all that's already happened, which is awesome because that lets me focus on what is important, and that's putting boots on the ground. Um, and what I mean by that is I'm out in the field, I am out driving in the community, checking known areas that a child may hang out at, so I'm talking bus stops, transit stations, malls, homeless encampments, relatives' homes, parks, whatever you can, wherever you can think, I will set foot in to try to find a child. And again, a lot of that information I'm getting directly from the people that are, um, either living or involved with the child. Um, so that's where I like to spend the majority of my time, because that's normally where you get the most results is going out there and knocking on doors and showing people the face of the child and asking them if they recognize them. It's it's those sorts of outreach and connections I'm making out in the community that normally will lead me somewhere or put me on track to hopefully finding a child. Um, but more simply, if a child has a phone number or a phone on them, I'm going to be trying to reach out to them on the phone. Social media is kind of I wasn't really prepared for how much I've actually need to use social media in this position. But I mean, and it's pretty much common sense at this point. The kids are sucked into their phones and specifically social media. So Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Discord, um, all those apps I have access to myself. And I do outreach to the youth directly, and also relatives on social media as well. And then outside of that, I also have internal search databases that I use on my own. So, I can search through child welfare, history to kind of get a better picture of what's going on with the child. Or, I have access to, the system, or I don't have access to, but I can get information about, where a family maybe is getting food stamps if I can't find them. So I can find an address or a more current number if they've, came in for community services like that. Um, and I've kind of gone into communications with relatives and friends. So that's just kind of like how it happens when I'm notified. But that obviously completely takes away from the fact that I have a lot of kids that are missing on my caseload at any time. So at any given time, I could have, I don't know, as low as like 4 or 5, all the way up to, I think at one point I had 15 kiddos on my caseload that were missing. So I'm always trying to balance how and where I'm putting my work into, and more often than not, that ties into vulnerability. So, if I have a 13-year-old young, gal that's at risk for exploitation out on the run, living in the streets, bouncing from friend's house to friend's house, and we have some clear and heavy concerns that they may be involved in some unsafe things like that. I'm going to be putting a lot of my time to get them to safety, because that's our big concern here. But like I said, it's all about me balancing my schedule and how I do things. It can be kind of a headache at times, because one of the other things that I'm responsible for is following up with kids when they come back from a run. So as much as I get notified when they do run, I'm also notified when they come back into care, and that's an important time, because we want to figure out what's going on. What was happening while they were on the run? Were they the victim of any crimes? Um, you know, how are you making money, or how are you getting food? How are you, supporting yourself? Those sorts of things. And we do that through what I would call a debrief. It's a set of questions, but normally it's just me just talking frankly with children, asking them how things are going and what's happening. Um, so we do that, and then another thing that I do is we complete a CSEC screen. Kind of goes hand in hand with the questions that I'm asking kids, and you're assessing for you know exploitation, really, essentially at that point. So what things that I look out for are, is a kid coming home with expensive belongings that don't really make sense, like a brand new iPhone or a designer purse or something like that that doesn't really make sense. I'm always looking out for red flags, because you want to kind of get ahead of the game if a child's kind of heading down that route of um, putting but being in a position that they could be exploited. We always try to get ahead of that. Um, and I think another not cool thing, but an interesting thing about my role is that we try to do a lot of preparation for when kids return from care, because without locators involved, as you know, there's retention issues across the board with, social workers, and in every line of work right now. A lot of social workers are for one, if we're someone like myself is not assigned, they should be out making these search efforts too. But a lot of the times, there's not a lot of planning and prepping for when a child comes into care. So that's another thing that I try to focus on. So if I'm identifying that it's a clear mental health concern, and I find out that a kiddo is not connected to the right services, I want to get things in place so that the second they come back into care, right away we can get services started. Or if a child is at risk for CSEC, getting an advocate involved and assigned even while a child is missing, so that again the second they come back, well, advocate, come with me, let me introduce you to this child, and try to make that connection on its own there. Sorry, I'm talking a lot here. I don't know if I'm supposed to talk this much. But just the last thing I wanted to touch on is we do attend court hearings, safety planning meetings, family team decision meetings as well. And that helps us kind of stay concurrent with what's going on with a child, especially for when they do come back into care. And I think someone asked a question in the chat about, like, what's the typical time that a child is on the run? And there's no clear answer to that. It could be a few days, it could be months. But even when a child comes back into care, I still stay assigned to a case for, it's about 3 months. I give them a 3-month period, and I kind of monitor the case, see if things are stabilizing. And if they aren't, I try to step in to, see what we can do differently. But the way that I kind of stay up to date with that sort of stuff is by attending those sorts of meetings. I think that's all I wanted to say on this slide. If you could go to the next one, please. One thing that I haven't really discussed so far is, it's pretty clear that I'm out there. I'm trying to locate a child, bring them back to safety, back into care. But as I said, every case is different, and every every child that goes on the run, I can say with utmost confidence that most of these kiddos have a lot of trauma that they are living with. More often than not, it is not addressed. It's a lot of situations where kids bottle things up and don't let them out, um, which can make recovering them extremely difficult, especially if they have a distrust for authority, law enforcement, DCYF social workers. I'm when I'm meeting a kid, sometimes they have been involved in our systems in one way or another for months or years at times. So they have this viewpoint of what a social worker is, and know that there are social workers that can, remove them from the home. So a lot of the kids that I'm working with do have that distrust, and that kind of puts me in a position where I have to balance. I want to get them to safety. I want to get them the help that they need. But sometimes you have to start at ground zero, and you have to start with making that connection with the youth and getting them to see that you are not some bad guy that's going to throw them in the back of the car and make them go to some place that they are not familiar with. Um, so, especially for those cases where kids are missing for months on end, and there are cases where kids interact with law enforcement, interact with social workers, but refuse to come or refuse to leave. And truth be told, we can't detain a child. Obviously there are circumstances where if a child has a warrant, or if there's maybe a pickup order on file, those are different situations. But there are a few kids on my caseload now that they'll meet up with me out in the community. They'll let me buy them, a lunch, and I can kind of catch up and see how they're doing. But they won't leave with me, and those situations are tough because I want to see them come back into care. But over time, my relationship building with them could hopefully lead to a point where they actually do see, okay, maybe I should come back into, maybe I should come back into school, or maybe I should get that assessment done. So we want to be there to show up when they're at their worst and also when they're doing good. And especially if a youth that's been on the run maybe gets picked up for a new crime and they're sitting over in detention, I'm gonna go visit them when they come back into care because I have to, but I'm gonna do everything I can to continually visit them as much as I can. I wish there was more hours in the day so I could make those sorts of visits. Um, but yeah, we want to show up again when they're not doing good, and also when they are. And I mentioned this, yeah, just staying in touch with them when they're not willing to come into care. Actually, a lot of kiddos I work with don't realize that we can help them at least access basic needs while they're on the run. So, if it's a kiddo that needs to go see a doctor, guess what? Even if they're missing, I'll go meet up with them out in the community. I'll take them to a doctor's appointment. I'll get something like that set up. And some other people from the out, from an outside point of view may see, well, like, well, that's a missing child. You should make, get them to safety right away, or come up with some sort of plan in the moment there. But sometimes in my job, you have to take the little wins. And it's those opportunities of showing them, okay, I'm a safe person. I'm going to take you to this doctor's appointment. The next time something happens, they may know to reach out to me, and they may feel like they can trust me more, which could hopefully lead to an opportunity to get them back into care. It's a very complicated field, just to be upfront with you all. And it's really hard to summarize everything as well, because every case is just completely different, and there's always so many different moving parts going on with them. Um, and I'll just kind of close with this. I mean, we're always my coworker Danielle and I are always trying to brainstorm ideas on how we bring kids back into care, because again, it's way harder than it seems to when you have kids that do not trust you. And yeah, that fear complex really puts up a big barrier in terms of um, even accessing basic needs for them. So yeah, I'll end it with that. We can move on to the next slide. I think I'm kind of moving ahead here. Unfortunately, I'm kind of explaining to you my style of engagement, which is trauma informed engagement. you know um, I'm always going to be responding with empathy and understanding to these children. I never try to raise my voice with them. I always try to be a voice of reason. I try to validate what they're going through. Um, and this piece on the right is the most important one that I've noticed in this line of work is the fight, flight, and freeze, appease, dissociate. That is what we see in almost every child, or at least I feel like I see that with every child. There's some sort of process to how they are behaving. And, I've interacted with children that, if you find them out in the community, they see you running after them, guess what? That's going to make them run even further away from you. So there are some situations where you have to kind of let them walk away from you, let them think about it. And more often than not, they'll come back and be willing to have just a real face-to-face conversation. And one of the things that is also important is to offer them a choice, right? No kids, no old 16, 17-year-olds gonna, uh, well, there are some, but, trying to make kids do things that you want them to do, especially coming from someone that may not know them personally, or this is my first time interacting with you, they're not gonna buy into it. You have to offer them a choice. You have to kind of reframe the concerning behavior they have as, a decision they're making. So again, offering them a choice on, sure, you can stay out in the situation you're in right now, but what is that going to lead to you? What do you see, what do you think is going to happen to yourself? Do you see the risks that could come with you staying on the run and bouncing from friend's house to friend's house, or what it may be? So again, this is just kind of a good visual. And I think that really anyone trying to engage with this sort of, or this population of youth that run away, they should buy into this form of engagement. You'll have a greater success of getting them back on track. Um, Adolescents are agents of their own free will, so they make their own decisions. We have to be there to try to guide them to make those right decisions, and we try to respond in the ways that can kind of lead to that outcome.
Yeah. Thanks, Blair.
Mhm.
We are at time, but we do have one more slide for you, which is who families can contact if their child is missing. So this is a list that hopefully, like I said, these slides will be disseminated. But there is the Missing and Unidentified Persons Unit, and also the Missing Indigenous Person Alert System with the Washington State Patrol. We've got some numbers in here for NCMEC. There's the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And then want to really shout out the work of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Persons Task Force and their subcommittees. And there's a contact here for them, and they did just publish their missing persons toolkit, and it's really awesome. So there's a link to it right here. But it really is for families to sort of map out the steps that they need to do, because not we are stressed out enough when one of our young people goes missing, but when it's your child, that's a whole other level of stress. And so it's good to have a guide like that, or a person to sort of shepherd you through it. And that is all that we have for today. And thank you. Our contact information is on this last slide. And feel free to reach out at any time for anything.
Cameron, just one last question. Are you sharing the PowerPoint of information today?
Yeah, this is all, everyone can have it.
Okay, so there was a question in the chat. That PowerPoint will be shared at the end of our conference on the OTR training page. There'll be a link to it, which will have all the resources that Cameron and Blair went through in their session today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Cassie. Yeah, in the Office of Tribal Relations, we just want to thank Cameron and Blair for being here today and for giving us just this great information that we can take forward. So thank you so much. And we're going to break for lunch until 1 o'clock. And after lunch, we will have in session A, Equicourt's Principles and Lessons Learned. And in session B, we will have, looks like the POST program for juvenile rehabilitation youth. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you after lunch.